Alright, so let's go ahead and we're going to go on with section 5 now on Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic Age. Alright, so as we set the scene, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about Alexander the Great. What legacy does he leave behind? What's the impact of culture in Greece, to the east of Greece, and what was the Persian Empire all the way actually through to India and beyond? And then looking ahead to next chapter we're going to be covering. So when we set the scene, we're really going to start off by talking about a man by the name of Philip II of Macedonia. And one of the quotes we have from Demosthenes at the time says, "He is always taking more, everywhere casting his net around us, while we sit idle and do nothing." That were people concerned about the Greeks' northern neighbors, the Macedonians, during the reign of Philip II. They weren't just worried when Alexander came that he was going to be the one to move through. They were already concerned about Philip II because he already was moving in and increasing the Macedonian Empire. This is a picture and highlighted here for you in the dark blue is what is considered Macedonia during this time, right in this area here. Okay, they are of Greek origin, and one of the connections to Greece is, as I mentioned previously, Aristotle was actually Alexander the Great's tutor as he was growing up. So, what is Philip's dream? Well, Philip's dream is really to conquer all of Greece and Persia. He's going to gain the throne in 359 BC, and he's going to build an army. He's going to be bribing people. He's going to use diplomacy. He's going to use the threat of war. He's going to use actual war to increase his power and to really see that dream realized. In 338, they're going to have the Battle of Chaeronea, where Alexander actually takes part, and Athens and Thebes are effectively defeated at the Battle of Chaeronea. Here's a map for you. Actually, Philip is going to use basically a retreating technique to draw the Athenians into pursuit, and then Alexander is going to come from the side. It was quite effective. And even the crack unit of the Theban Sacred Band, widely feared, very powerful, is going to fall this day. What's left of them are effectively going to be taken out here in this battle. Basically, Philip is going to meet his end at the end of an assassin. He's going to be assassinated, which is really going to pave the way for Alexander to take over, which he's eventually going to do here. When he starts moving in, after putting down the Greek rebellions, which is what's going to happen, Olympias, who is Alexander's mother, is going to maneuver to actually have him made king, and that's going to happen. 334, he's 20 years old. He's going to cross over into Asia Minor, and he's actually going to begin his march. In terms of Persian context, Darius III is already weakened by rebellion in many places within the Persian Empire. He's spread kind of thin, and Alexander wins a decisive victory at the Granicus River, at what's known as the Battle of Granicus, and in 331 he's going to take Babylon. He's going to continue pushing eastward I have a map here in a second I'm going to show you. He's going to push beyond the Hindu Kush Mountains. I mean, you're getting, modern-day Pakistan. You're getting into India. 326, they are going to actually discover new technology, pictures here called war elephants. But his men, when they get into what is the monsoon season, and they get into an area that's just getting more and more exotic, more different from what they're used to. They're in a completely different land. They feel like they're halfway around the world. They're going to refuse to go any farther, and they're going to say, "Look, we really need to start heading on back." And his men do get to a point where they would kind of insist on going back the other way. So here's a map of actually his conquest starting here. Again, Granicus is here. He actually does go south and takes Egypt. He does gain the title of Pharaoh. Okay, again to Babylon here, and then he's going to start pursuing, beyond the Hindu Kush on into parts of India through the Jadrosian Desert, and back to Persepolis, and again that's provided so you can take a look at exactly how it all went. For those of you who were part of the debate, that fourth article on the siege of Tyre, Tyre is located here. That was where he actually took the island city of Tyre. He does suddenly die in 323 BC. By many accounts, he's believed to die of a fever associated with malaria. And unfortunately for his legacy, his massive empire he's able to establish is actually going to fall apart within really a single generation. He's going to attempt to basically chop it up. Well, actually, they're going to attempt to chop it up when he dies, between really three of his main generals. He doesn't really give clear instructions as to who he wants to take over. There's the classic example of when he's on his deathbed and they ask him what to do, and he says, the strongest is all he can mutter as he's giving up his last few breaths through the fever. But it basically, without his charismatic military strength at the fore, it's going to kind of deteriorate relatively quickly. But his legacy that he leaves behind in the wake of this massive militaristic movement is this big blending of cultures that exists. And the city of Alexandria, the most famous city of Alexandria that we're going to discuss here, comes out of, I have a picture of the blender here to let you know this is going to be this big blending of cultures. What are we talking about? Well, what Alexander would do when they would get into a new area is he would not only name cities after himself, but when they would go and take an area, he would bring in specifically Greek artists and soldiers and traders and artisans, and he would basically take them in and move them there forcibly, and they would become a realistic population, a functioning population inside that Persian city or wherever they happen to be conquering that Egyptian city. And that would serve to spread Greek culture, and it would cause this interesting blend as they would get cross-assimilated. Now the Greeks are going to have influence on that civilization where they were, and vice versa. Now the Greeks are going to be influenced by where they were. He does himself take a Persian bride, and there are accounts. There's a large, massive wedding between many of his men and Persian brides, many of whom get quick divorces immediately after Alexander passes, but that's a tale for another time. And the term we're going to give for the new culture that's going to be created by this massive blending together is the Hellenistic culture. Alright, he named, I believe there was as many as 13 or 15 different cities through his conquest. He names Alexandria, obviously, after himself, but the most famous and the most important of these cities is actually going to be in Egypt, near the trading lanes. It's going to be a city at its peak of 1 million people plus, and it's going to be home to something called the Pharos, which is actually pictured here, which is a huge lighthouse that was, we believe to be about 440 feet high. But the real linchpin as to what made the city so unbelievably powerful is going to be what was referred to as the museum. This is not a museum like we think about now. This wasn't just the Smithsonian. It had multiple parts. It had a zoo. It had a library. But the key thing, it had lecture halls, which implies obviously learning and teaching going on. So you've got this high concentration, this big draw of not only access to trading, but it's also an educational center, and that makes it a very, very powerful place. Obviously, for those of you who've seen I think National Treasure with Nicolas Cage, the modern day movie, John Voight was in it as well. You've got the scrolls and all the books from the Library of Alexandria, which was lost, which is unfortunate. In terms of opportunities for women did see a little more liberation during this time period in Hellenistic culture. They weren't just restricted to homes. Many of them were taught to read and write, and they actually did contribute culturally in terms of being poets and philosophers. We also have an important leader in Egypt. You remember Hatshepsut and Nefertiti back from when we did Chapter 2 on Egypt. We're going to see a pretty powerful Egyptian leader named Cleopatra during this time. There's going to be some new schools of thought and advances in learning medicine that occur under Hellenistic civilization. Zeno is going to found a philosophy called Stoicism, and this is really a calm acceptance of what happens to you. This is your destiny is basically there, and you're going to accept it. But the two things they promote that are important that we're going to come back to later are protecting the rights of your fellow man and moral equality. These two things are important for us to just make a footnote of now to look back to later. In terms of mathematics, you've got Pythagoras and Euclid, two foundational people in terms of math. You've got heliocentrism proposed by Aristarchus. No one's going to believe him or his theories for a while. Eratosthenes is going to propose that the Earth is round and approximate his size. He's going to be off, but he's going to propose it. And Archimedes and the lever and the pulley and basic physics. And also the Hippocratic Oath will be credited to a man by the name of Hippocrates, who really is going to promote the idea of treating causes of sickness and curing them rather than just treating just the symptoms. And I have an excerpt here from the standard Hippocratic Oath, really, which is to do no harm. Looking ahead, Rome is right around the corner. By 133 BC, they're going to be conquering Asia Minor and coming in and leading the other half of the, not really the half, it's not really fair, but the other massive classical civilization for Western culture.